The Maserati hit the guardrail at 70 miles per hour, metal screaming against metal, the world tilting sideways in a kaleidoscope of headlights and ocean, and the terrible bright certainty that this was how Evan Cross died. Not in a boardroom or a penthouse, but on a forgotten coastal highway, running from a life he'd never chosen, the airbag deployed like a fist to the face, stealing his breath. And then there was only silence, broken by the hiss of the radiator and the distant crash of waves against cliffs he couldn't see in the darkness. Evan sat stunned, tasting blood, his designer suit torn at the shoulder, his Rolex still ticking calmly on his wrists like time hadn't just fractured into before and after. He'd left the engagement party 2 hours ago, walked out mid-toast while 300 guests watched, while his father's face went purple with rage, while Victoria stood in her $10,000 dress, looking less heartbroken than inconvenienced. He'd grabbed his keys, ignored security, and driven north with no destination except away from Manhattan and expectations and the future that had been decided for him before he was old enough to have opinions. 32 years old, and he'd never made a single choice that was actually his. The driver's door was jammed. Evan kicked it twice before it gave, stumbled out onto asphalt still warm from the day's heat, and assessed the damage. The Maserati was totaled, crumpled against the guardrail like expensive origami, steam rising from the hood in ghostly wisps. His phone, miraculously intact, showed 23 missed calls from his father, 14 from Victoria, 8 from his assistant, and a string of increasingly threatening texts that all boiled down to the same message: come back now or face the consequences. Evan hurled the phone over the guardrail, watched it arc into darkness, heard the distant splash as it hit the ocean below. The destruction felt good. First real thing he'd done in months, maybe years. Some part of him breaking free with that small act of violence. He started walking, no plan except forward, following the coastal road as it wound through darkness punctuated by occasional streetlights. His Italian leather shoes weren't designed for hiking. His head throbbed where it had hit the airbag. Blood dripped from a cut above his eyebrow, warm and sticky, proof he was still alive even if he didn't quite feel like it. The town appeared gradually, first a scatter of lights, then buildings huddled against the coastline, then a main street that looked like it hadn't changed since 1985, boutiques with hand-painted signs, a diner still open despite the late hour, a bookstore with cats sleeping in the window display. Evan had passed through 1,000 towns like this, from private jets and town cars, places that existed between the important destinations, backdrop to other people's lives. He'd never actually been in one before. The flower shop was dark except for a light in the back room, and Evan found himself drawn to it for reasons he couldn't name. Something about the flowers visible through the window, wildly arranged in mason jars and vintage pitchers, nothing like the sterile orchids that decorated every Cross Industries office. He was staring at a particularly unruly bunch of sunflowers when the door flew open and a woman nearly collided with him. Jesus! She jumped back, hand flying to her chest, and in the spill of light from the doorway, Evan saw her clearly. Late 20s, dark hair escaping from a messy bun, paint-stained overalls over a tank top. Eyes the exact green of sea glass he'd collected as a child during the one family vacation his father had allowed before deciding vacations were wasteful. "You scared the hell out of me." "Sorry." Evan's voice came out rougher than intended. "I didn't mean to. I was just looking." At 1 a.m, her eyes narrowed, taking in his torn suit, the blood on his face. the general dishevelment that was probably concerning from an outside perspective. Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone? No. Too quick, too desperate. He softened it. No, I'm fine. I just had some car trouble. Walked into town. She studied him with the frank assessment of someone used to reading people, and Evan found himself hoping she didn't recognize him, that his face wasn't as famous here as it was in Manhattan, that maybe he could be anonymous just a little while longer. You're bleeding, she observed. It's nothing. Head wounds bleed a lot even when they're minor, but that doesn't mean you don't have a concussion. She sighed, the sound of someone making a decision against their better judgment. Come inside. I'll clean you up, call you a tow truck, and then you can be on your way to wherever you were running from. What makes you think I'm running? Her smile was brief and knowing. Honey, I know running when I see it. Takes one to know one. She pushed the door open wider, gestured him inside. I'm Harper, by the way, Harper Hayes, and before you get any ideas, I have pepper spray and a very loud scream, so don't make me regret being a good Samaritan. Evan, he hesitated on the threshold, this moment crystallizing into something that felt significant, even though he couldn't say why. And I promise I'm not dangerous. Just, he searched for words that weren't a complete lie. Lost. Well, lost boy, welcome to Crescent Bay. Harper led him through the shop, past coolers full of roses and lilies, past a work table covered in ribbon and wire, and the beautiful chaos of creation, into a small back room that served as office, storage, and apparently living space, judging by the pull-out couch and hot plate. Population 3,000 in summer, half that in winter, and exactly 0 people who care about whatever you're running from as long as you don't bring trouble to their doorstep. She pointed him to a chair, pulled out a first aid kit that had clearly seen better days, and set to work cleaning the cut on his forehead with efficient, no-nonsense movements. Up close, she smelled like flowers and paint and something citrusy, and Evan found himself noticing details. The paint under her fingernails, the constellation of freckles across her nose, the way she bit her lip when concentrating. So what's your story? Harper asked, dabbing antiseptic that stung enough to make him wince. Wall Street burnout? Tech bro who forgot how to sleep? Lawyer who finally read the fine print on his soul? Something like that. Evan managed a smile. What's yours? Failed artist turned flower shop owner because my mother left me the business and I couldn't bear to sell it, even though it's barely profitable and requires me to work 80 hours a week just to keep the lights on. She said it lightly, but he heard the grief underneath, recent and raw. She died 6 months ago. Cancer. And I came back to this town I swore I'd escape to watch her die and discover that escape is just another word for running, and eventually you have to stop. The honesty stunned him. People didn't talk like that in Evan's world, didn't admit to failure or fear or the messy, complicated truth of being human. They presented polished versions, strategic revelations, every word calculated for maximum advantage. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Yeah, well? Harper finished with the bandage, stepped back to assess her work. Life's a bitch, and then you inherit a flower shop that's 3 months from foreclosure. She caught his expression and laughed, self-deprecating. Sorry, that's probably more information than you wanted from a stranger at 1 a.m. No, Evan said quietly. It's perfect. It's real. I haven't heard anything real in... He stopped, realizing he was about to reveal more than safe. A long time. Harper tilted her head, studying him with those sea glass eyes. You're not from around here. No. And you're running from something big, something that has you crashing cars and throwing away phones. She gestured to the bulge in his pocket that was obviously not a phone, and wandering around small towns at 1 a.m, looking at flowers like they're the answer to questions you're afraid to ask. You're very observant. I'm a florist. Reading people is half the job. Brides who want carnations but think they're supposed to want roses. Grieving sons who can't say, I love you, but can say it with lilies. She crossed her arms, and the gesture made her look younger, more vulnerable despite the armor of sarcasm. So what is it you can't say, Evan? He should have deflected, made an excuse, left before this conversation went somewhere dangerous. But sitting in this small, cluttered room with a woman who had just admitted to failure and grief and the impossibility of escape, Evan found himself wanting to tell the truth for the first time in his adult life. I was supposed to get engaged tonight, he said, to a woman I don't love, to merge two companies, to fulfill my father's grand plan for cross industries, expansion into European markets. It was all arranged, all decided, and I've known about it since I was 25, but kept telling myself I could find a way out, that I'd figure out how to be my own person while still being the heir my father needed. He laughed, bitter and exhausted, and then, tonight, standing there in my engagement party with 300 people watching, I realized there was no way out except through, that if I didn't leave right then, I never would. So you left. So I crashed. Harper was quiet for a long moment, and Evan prepared himself for judgment or pity or the careful distance people adopted around wealthy problems they couldn't relate to. Instead, she said, "Good for you." He blinked. "What?" "Good for you for leaving. For choosing yourself over everyone else's expectations. Most people don't have the guts." She moved to the small window, stared out at the darkened street. "I spent 10 years in New York trying to make it as an artist, failed spectacularly, came crawling back here thinking I'd betrayed my mother's memory by leaving in the first place, that staying and suffering was somehow more honorable than pursuing my own dreams." She turned back to him, and her expression was fierce. "But you know what? We're both wrong. Your father's wrong. My guilt's wrong. We don't owe our lives to other people's visions of who we should be." "Easy to say," Evan pointed out. "Harder to live. Everything worth doing is harder to live than say." Harper pulled out her phone, started scrolling. "The tow truck can't come until morning. Lou doesn't do after midnight calls unless it's life or death. You need somewhere to stay? I can find a hotel. The only hotel in town is the Beachside Inn, and it's been closed for renovations since March." She studied him, calculation mixing with what might have been sympathy. "I have a couch. It's lumpy and probably smells like paint thinner, but it's free and it comes with breakfast if you don't mind eggs, scrambled with whatever vegetables are about to go bad." "I can't impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering." Harper's smile was crooked and genuine. "Besides, you look like you could use a friend, and God knows I could use the company. This shop gets pretty quiet after midnight." Evan knew he should refuse, should find some other option that didn't involve accepting kindness from a stranger who had no idea who he was or what chaos would follow when his family's investigators inevitably tracked him down. But the pull-out couch in this cluttered flower shop felt more like home than the penthouse he'd lived in for 8 years. "Just for tonight," he heard himself say. "Just for tonight," Harper agreed. She made the couch up with sheets that smelled like lavender, left him with a bottle of water and 2 aspirin, and disappeared into what he assumed was her actual bedroom, probably just as small, just as cluttered, just as far from the luxury he'd grown up in as possible. Evan lay in darkness listening to the town settle, Distant ocean waves, wind chimes someone had forgotten to bring inside, the creak of old buildings adjusting to night. His body ached from the crash, his head throbbed despite the aspirin, and his mind raced through implications of what he'd done. By morning, his father would have mobilized every resource to find him. By afternoon, there'd be a price on his return. By evening, he didn't let himself think about evening. Instead, he thought about Harper's sea glass eyes and paint-stained hands, the way she'd offered kindness without asking for anything in return, the strange, impossible hope that maybe in this forgotten coastal town he could figure out how to be Evan instead of the cross heir, the billionaire, the commodity his father had spent 32 years refining. When he finally slept, he dreamed not of boardrooms or expectations, but of flowers growing wild through cracks in concrete, beautiful and resilient and absolutely free. He woke to sunlight and the smell of coffee, stumbled into the shop's main room to find Harper arranging roses with the focused intensity of an artist at work. She looked up, smiled, and handed him a mug without breaking rhythm. "Lou says your car's totaled. Might as well have hit a building. Insurance will cover it, but the paperwork will take weeks. And he's never seen a Maserati in person before. So he's pretty excited to strip it for parts." She snipped a stem at a precise angle, added it to the arrangement, "which leaves you stranded in Crescent Bay with no transportation. And, I'm guessing, no real plan." "That's accurate." "Well, I have a proposition for you." Harper set down her scissors, faced him directly. "I need help with the shop. Deliveries, arrangements, manual labor, anything that keeps me from having to hire an actual employee I can't afford. You need somewhere to lie low while you figure out your next move. I'm offering room, board, and minimum wage in exchange for 40 hours a week. No questions asked about where you came from or what you're running from. You don't know anything about me. I know you're desperate, skilled at running, and probably better at manual labor than you think, considering those calluses aren't from golf clubs." She raised an eyebrow at his surprised expression. "What? You thought I wouldn't notice? You've got working hands, Evan. Whatever else you are, you're not afraid of getting them dirty." The irony made him want to laugh. Those calluses were from the woodworking shop he'd built in secret, the one place his father hadn't been able to monetize or criticize, where Evan spent stolen hours building furniture no one would ever see, because admitting to a hobby that didn't advance the company was weakness. "I'll take the job," he said. "Good." Harper's grin was pure mischief. "You start in 20 minutes. Try not to kill any of my flowers." And just like that, Evan Cross, billionaire, heir, runaway groom, became a flower shop assistant in a town that didn't know his name, working for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a lost boy who needed somewhere to land. It was the most freedom he'd ever felt. The first week passed in a blur of flower names Evan couldn't keep straight. Deliveries to addresses he had to map on Harper's ancient phone, and the slow discovery that physical labor was actually satisfying when it wasn't attached to profit margins or shareholder expectations. He learned that Harper woke at 5 to hit the wholesale flower market in the next town over, that she took her coffee black with enough sugar to kill a horse, that she sang off-key to 80s rock while working, and swore creatively when orders went wrong. He learned the difference between garden roses and spray roses, that eucalyptus made everything look expensive, that baby's breath was having a comeback despite being dismissed as dated for a decade. He also learned that Crescent Bay was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone. where his presence was noted and discussed, but politely not interrogated, where Harper's introduction of him as my new assistant Evan, don't scare him off, was apparently sufficient explanation for most people. They think we're sleeping together, Harper announced on day 6, arranging sunflowers with the casual grace he'd come to admire. Mrs. Chen came in yesterday and asked how I was adjusting to cohabitation in a tone that suggested she knows exactly what cohabitation means. Evan, who'd been wrestling with floral wire, looked up sharply. Does that bother you? That they think it, or that we're not actually doing it? Her grin was wicked. Because honestly, the gossip is more interesting than the reality. Let them think what they want. Half this town has been trying to marry me off since I came back. At least this way, they'll leave me alone about Barry the dentist. There's a Barry the dentist? There's always a Barry the dentist. Harper snipped a stem with unnecessary violence. Nice guy. Boring conversation, thinks adventure means trying a new restaurant in the city once a year. My mother would have loved him. The way she said it, fond and bitter in equal measure, made Evan pause. You didn't want to make your mother happy? I wanted to make myself happy and hoped my mother would support that. Instead, I got 10 years of phone calls about when I was coming home, when I was giving up my phase, when I was going to accept that real life wasn't painting in a studio apartment in Brooklyn. Harper's hand stilled on the flowers, and Evan saw grief flash across her face, quick and sharp. And then she got sick, and I came home, and I never got to prove her wrong or right. Just got to watch her die thinking I was still running. You came back, Evan said quietly. That's not running, isn't it? Coming back because she was dying instead of coming back because I wanted to? Harper shook her head, dispelling the moment. Anyway, the point is, let them gossip. It's harmless, and it keeps my father from calling every week asking if I've met anyone yet. Evan wanted to ask about her father, about the family dynamics that made her choose New York over home, about all the complicated ways we disappointed the people who loved us. But Harper had already moved on, teaching him the proper way to spiral bind a bouquet, and the moment passed. By the end of week 2, Evan had settled into a rhythm he'd never experienced. Wake with the sun, work with his hands, eat simple meals at the diner where everyone knew his order, fall into bed exhausted and dreamless. No emails, no board meetings, no carefully calibrated conversations where every word was strategy. He should have been climbing the walls, should have been desperate for his phone, his laptop, the constant connectivity that had defined his adult life. Instead, he felt something that might have been peace. You're good at this, Harper observed one afternoon, watching him construct a centerpiece for the mayor's anniversary party. The arrangements, you've got an eye for balance. I build furniture, Evan admitted before thinking better of it, as a hobby. Same principles, proportion, negative space, how elements interact. You build furniture. Harper's tone suggested this was the most interesting thing she'd learned about him. Like what? Tables, mostly. Some chairs. I made a bookshelf once that took 6 months because I kept redesigning it. He focused on the flowers to avoid her gaze. It's stupid, It's not stupid. Her hand covered his, stilling his movements, forcing him to look up. Creating things is never stupid, Evan. It's the most human thing we do. The moment stretched, her hand warm over his. The shop quiet except for the hum of the coolers and distant ocean. Evan became acutely aware of her proximity. How close they were standing. How her eyes were exactly the color of sea glass, backlit by sun. How easy it would be to close the distance between them. Harper pulled back first, clearing her throat. Right. Well, Mayor's party won't arrange itself. But something had shifted. Some invisible line they'd been carefully not crossing suddenly illuminated, acknowledged, impossible to ignore. That night, lying on his lumpy couch, Evan allowed himself to imagine what if. What if he stayed here in this small town, working in a flower shop, building furniture in his spare time? What if Harper's accidental kindness became intentional, became something more? What if he could actually be the person he pretended to be these past 2 weeks? Just Evan, no legacy, no expectations, no billion-dollar empire waiting to devour him. The fantasy lasted until his borrowed phone rang at 2 a.m. Evan stared at the unknown number, every instinct screaming not to answer. But some part of him, the part still trained to respond to authority, still conditioned to jump when his father called, reached for it anyway. Evan, his father's voice, cold and controlled. I've been very patient. How did you get this number? Did you really think I wouldn't find you? You're my son, my heir. I've had investigators tracking you since the night you left, and now that I know where you are, we need to discuss your return. Evan sat up, suddenly wide awake, adrenaline flooding his system. I'm not coming back. Yes, you are, because if you don't, I will destroy that pathetic little flower shop you're hiding in, the woman who owns it, and every person in that insignificant town who helped you stay hidden from your responsibilities. The threat was delivered calmly, matter of fact, the way his father discussed quarterly earnings. I'll bury them in lawsuits, buy out their mortgages, make their lives so difficult they'll beg you to leave. You're bluffing. Am I? The smile was audible. Try me, Evan. Come home tomorrow, marry Victoria as planned, and this all goes away. Stay there, and I'll make sure Harper Hayes loses everything, starting with the shop her mother left her. Foreclosure is so tragic, especially when it could have been avoided. The line went dead. Evan sat in darkness, phone trembling in his hand, every fragile piece of peace he'd built shattering like dropped glass. His father knew where he was, knew about Harper, knew exactly which pressure points to exploit. He could leave, pack his few belongings, disappear into the night, lead his father's investigators away from Crescent Bay, and hope the threat evaporated with his absence. Or he could stay and let Harper pay the price for his freedom. Neither option was acceptable. Neither option was survivable, unless the idea came fully formed, reckless, and desperate, and absolutely insane. But lying there in Harper's flower shop, listening to the ocean and the impossible quiet of a life that wasn't his, Evan realized it might be the only option that let them both win. He just had to convince Harper to marry him. He waited until morning, rehearsing arguments while pretending to sleep, running through every possible objection and counter-argument like he was preparing for a board presentation, which, in a way, he was the most important presentation of his life. Harper found him in the shop at 6 a.m., already arranging the day's orders, looking surprised. You're up early. Couldn't sleep. Evan set down the roses he'd been working with, turned to face her directly. I need to tell you something about who I am, where I came from, and why my staying here is about to become very complicated for you. Harper poured herself coffee, leaned against the work table, and waited with that unflappable calm he'd come to recognize as her dealing with crisis mode. My full name is Evan Cross. My father is Richard Cross, CEO of Cross Industries, tech, real estate, venture capital, about 15 other sectors I can't keep track of. I'm worth about billion personally, more if you count the trust funds and inheritances I'm supposed to receive when I turn 35 and prove I'm responsible enough to handle them. He watched her face for reaction, saw only careful attention. I was supposed to marry a woman named Victoria Ashford 3 weeks from now to merge our family's companies. Instead, I ran, crashed my car, and let you think I was just some burnout who needed help. Okay, Harper said slowly. That's a lot. It gets worse. My father found me. He called last night, and he's threatening to destroy your shop, foreclose on your mortgage, bury you in legal trouble, anything to force me to come home and fulfill my obligations. Evan's hands clenched at his sides. I can leave. Draw him away from here. Let you go back to your life without my complications. Or, this was it. The moment that would either save them both or destroy any chance of the fragile friendship they'd built. Or you could marry me. Harper choked on her coffee. I'm sorry, what? Hear me out. Evan moved closer, intensity replacing his usual careful control. My father's leverage is the arranged marriage. He needs me to marry Victoria to close the business deal. But if I'm already married, legally, provably married, he can't force me into the engagement. The deal falls through, Victoria's family backs out, and my father loses his primary method of control. And you get your freedom while I get what exactly? Harper's eyes had gone sharp, calculating. Because so far this sounds like I'm taking on all the risk. You get enough money to save your shop and keep it running for years. I'll pay off your mortgage, cover your operating expenses, set up an account for emergency repairs and expansion. Whatever you need. Evan pulled out the phone he'd been hiding. Not his original smartphone, but a burner he'd bought at the convenience store for exactly this purpose, and showed her the numbers he'd calculated. 1 year of marriage, totally fake, strictly business. We stay in Crescent Bay, live our separate lives, and when the year is up and the deal has permanently fallen through, we divorce quietly. You keep the money, I keep my freedom. We both win. That's insane. Completely. But it works. He could see her wavering, see the exact moment she started calculating her own angles. Harper, I know this is asking a lot. I know I lied by omission about who I was, but I'm being completely honest now. I need this. And unless I'm reading things wrong, you need this too. Harper was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee like it held answers. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. Your father will know it's fake. Probably. But legally it doesn't matter. Once we're married, the contract with Victoria's family is void. He'll rage and threaten and probably cut me off financially. But I have my own money, my own accounts he can't touch. I can survive his anger as long as I'm legally free of the arrangement. And Victoria? Will move on to the next billionaire heir. Trust me, she's not heartbroken. This was business for her too. Harper circled the work table, thinking, and Evan forced himself to stay still, to let her process without pressure, even though every second felt like drowning. Finally, she stopped, faced him, and said, I have conditions. Relief flooded through him so intensely, he nearly swayed. Name them. 1, we tell people the truth, that it's a business arrangement. I'm not lying to this entire town about being in love with you. Agreed, though we should probably make it believable enough that my father can't prove it's fraud. 2, you actually work in the shop. This isn't you hiding out while I do everything. You pull your weight, already doing that. 3, no actual relationship stuff. No confusion about what this is. We're business partners, roommates at best. You don't get to fall in love with me and complicate things. The way she said it, defensive. almost scared, made Evan wonder what had happened in New York, what heartbreak had sent her running home. But now wasn't the time to ask. "Deal," he said, "though I can't promise you won't fall in love with me. I'm very charming when I try." Her laugh was startled and genuine. "You're an idiot is what you are. An idiot billionaire with terrible life choices. Is that a yes?" Harper extended her hand, businesslike and formal. 1 year, strictly business. You save your freedom, I save my shop, and we both walk away when it's over. Evan took her hand, felt the calluses from years of working with flowers and wire, the strength in her grip, the terrifying weight of this gamble they were making. 1 year, he agreed. Starting now. They got married 3 days later at the courthouse, with Marcus the bailiff and Lou the tow truck driver as witnesses. Harper in the same paint-stained overalls she'd worn when they met, and Evan in jeans and a button-down from the thrift store. No flowers, no celebration, just signatures on paper and the surreal reality of becoming husband and wife for a reason that had nothing to do with love. Walking out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine, wedding license in hand, Harper turned to him and said, "So, what now, husband?" "Now," Evans said, testing the word and finding it strange but not unpleasant. "We convince the world this is real, survive whatever my father throws at us, and try not to screw up the only good thing either of us has found in years. The shop or the marriage?" "Both." Harper smiled. And for the first time since he'd crashed into her life, Evan let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, this insane plan might actually work. He didn't let himself think about condition 3, about the way his heart had stuttered when she had said, "You don't get to fall in love with me," about the fact that he might already be failing that particular requirement. Some lies, he was learning, were easier to tell yourself than others. The news hit the society pages within 24 hours. Cross industries, heir marries, unknown florist in coastal town, engagement to Ashford heiress, abruptly canceled. Evan watched Harper read the article on her phone, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been fear. "They make me sound like a gold digger," she said quietly. "Penniless artist turned flower shop owner ensnares billionaire in whirlwind romance while he's emotionally vulnerable." She looked up at him, and he saw the first real doubt since she had agreed to this. "Your father did this. He's already starting the campaign to destroy my reputation. Let him." Evan took the phone from her hands, set it aside. "We knew this would happen. The question is whether you're strong enough to weather it. Are you actually questioning my strength right now? I'm reminding you of it." He softened his tone. "Harper, we just declared war on one of the most powerful families in America. It's going to get ugly, fast. But if we hold the line, if we present a united front, they can't touch us. Easy for you to say. You're used to this world. You're Harper Hayes. You survived 10 years in New York, pursuing a dream everyone said was impossible. You came home and rebuilt a life from grief. You took in a stranger and offered kindness when you had every reason to protect yourself." Evan found himself moving closer without deciding to, drawn by the vulnerability in her eyes. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. Don't let my father's PR machine make you forget that." Something shifted in her expression, gratitude mixing with something warmer, more dangerous. "You're getting better at the pep talks. I had a good teacher." He meant it as lightness, but it came out sincere, weighted with the truth of what these weeks had meant. The moment stretched, comfortable and charged in equal measure. until Harper's phone rang and shattered it. She answered, listened, and her face went pale. "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." She hung up, hand shaking slightly. "That was my bank. Someone's trying to buy my mortgage. Anonymous LLC offering 3 times the property value, with the stipulation that I vacate within 30 days. Your father's moving faster than I expected." Evan was already pulling out his own phone, texting his lawyer. "But we can counter this. I'll buy the mortgage myself. Put it in your name outright. He can't foreclose if you own the property free and clear." "That's too much money." "Harper, I have $4 billion sitting in accounts earning interest. Let me use it for something that actually matters." He was typing rapidly now, instructions to his legal team, numbers that would have made most people's heads spin. "Consider it an investment in our mutual survival." "This is insane." "You keep saying that like it's going to change anything." Despite everything, she laughed. "Fair point." The counterattack came within hours. Evan's accounts were frozen pending investigation into suspicious activity, his credit cards declined, his access to liquid cash suddenly and catastrophically cut off. His father's message was clear: come home or lose everything. What Richard Cross didn't know was that Evan had been preparing for this possibility since he was 25, quietly moving money into offshore accounts and trust his father couldn't access, building a safety net for the rebellion he'd always known was coming. "We're fine," he told Harper that evening, over cheap pizza from the only delivery place in town. "He's throwing his weight around, but I have enough in protected accounts to cover us for years if necessary." Define cover us. Pay your mortgage, keep the shop running, live comfortably, and still have enough left over to make him regret trying to intimidate us. Evan took a bite of pizza, chewed thoughtfully. The question is how far he's willing to take this before he realizes I'm not backing down. The answer came the next morning in the form of Victoria Ashford herself. She arrived in a town car that probably cost more than most houses in Crescent Bay, stepped out in designer sunglasses and a dress that screamed Manhattan money, and walked into Harper's flower shop like she owned it. "So you're the girl who ruined my engagement," Victoria announced, removing her sunglasses to reveal ice blue eyes that assessed Harper with the precision of a corporate raider, evaluating a hostile takeover target. Harper, who'd been arranging tulips, didn't look up. "If your engagement could be ruined by someone you've never met, it probably wasn't very solid to begin with." "Oh, I like you." Victoria's smile was sharp and genuine. "Evan always did have terrible taste in women, but at least you have a spine." She turned to Evan, who'd emerged from the back room. "Can we talk? Privately?" They ended up in the small office, Victoria perched on the desk like she was posing for a magazine shoot, Evan leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Your father's losing his mind," Victoria said without preamble, ranting about ungrateful children and family honor and how he's going to make examples of everyone involved. "It's honestly impressive. I've never seen Richard this unhinged." "Good." "Is it?" Victoria tilted her head, studying him. "Because from where I'm sitting, you've traded one cage for another. You married a stranger to escape an arranged marriage, but now you're stuck in a small town pretending to be in love while your father systematically destroys anything you care about. How is that freedom, Evan? At least I chose this cage. Did you? Or did you just panic and grab the first exit you saw?" She stood, moved closer. "I'm here to offer you a deal. Come back. Marry me as originally planned. Your father will call off his dogs, Harper keeps her shop, and you get access to your money and your life back. And what do you get? The same thing I always wanted: a strategic partnership, social positioning, and a husband who won't embarrass me at dinner parties. Victoria's smile was sardonic. We can have separate lives, Evan, separate lovers, even. The marriage would be purely business, no pretense of romance. Isn't that what you wanted? Freedom without the mess of actual emotion? It was a good offer. Smart, strategic, exactly the kind of arrangement he might have accepted 3 weeks ago. But that was before Harper taught him what honesty looked like, before he'd discovered that physical labor could be satisfying, before he'd learned that peace was worth more than power. No, Evan said simply. Victoria's eyebrows rose. No, I'm done making choices based on what's strategic or convenient, or what causes the least disruption. I married Harper because I wanted to, because she's brave and real and everything I'm not. And if that's messy or complicated or dooms me to financial ruin, then at least it's my choice. He met her gaze steadily. I'm sorry, Victoria. You deserve better than this arrangement too, but I can't be the solution to your problems anymore. For a long moment, Victoria just stared at him, something unreadable crossing her face. Then she laughed, surprised and almost fond. You actually mean that? Yes, you're in love with her. It wasn't a question. That's not. We agreed this was business. Evan, I've known you for 7 years. I've watched you negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking, and you've never looked at anything the way you look at that flower shop and the woman who runs it. Victoria collected her purse, her sunglasses, her armor. For what it's worth, I hope you actually figure out how to make this work. You're an idiot, but you're a sincere idiot, and that's refreshing. She paused at the door, looked back. Fair warning, your father isn't going to stop. He views your defection as personal betrayal, and Richard Cross doesn't forgive betrayal. Whatever you think you're prepared for, it's going to be worse. Then she was gone, leaving Evan alone with the implications of what she'd said. Both the warning about his father and the terrifying accuracy of her observation about his feelings for Harper. He found Harper in the shop, finishing the tulip arrangement, her expression carefully neutral. How much of that did you hear? Enough. She set down her scissors, faced him. Is it true, what she said about how you feel? Evan could have lied, should have lied, maintained the fiction of their business arrangement, protected them both from the complication of actual emotion. Instead, he said, I don't know. Maybe. Does it matter? Of course it matters. Harper's voice rose, frustration breaking through. We had an agreement, Evan. Condition 3, no falling in love, no complicating things. And now Victoria's here saying you look at me like. She stopped, running her hands through her hair. This can't happen. We can't happen. Why not? Because I'm not what you think I am. The words burst out of her raw and desperate. You see strength and honesty and some idealized version of a woman who has her life together. But I'm a mess, Evan. I'm drowning in debt and grief and the terror that I'm going to lose everything my mother built. I'm angry all the time. At her for dying, at myself for leaving, at this stupid town for staying exactly the same while I fell apart. And I can't be your redemption story, your proof that running away was the right choice. Because what happens when you realize I'm just as trapped and miserable as you were? The confession hung between them, sharp and broken and achingly honest. Evan crossed the space between them slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he took her hands, those strong, calloused hands that had built a business from grief and held them gently. "I don't need you to be perfect," he said quietly. "I need you to be real. And Harper, you're the most real thing I've found in 32 years of performing for audiences who wanted me to be anything except human." He squeezed her hands. "If you don't want this, if you want to keep it strictly business, I'll respect that. But don't push me away because you're scared. Be scared and let me stand beside you anyway." Harper's eyes were wet, but she didn't cry, just looked at him with something that might have been hope mixed with terror. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "Neither do I. We can figure it out together." "That's a terrible plan." "All my plans are terrible. Haven't you noticed?" She laughed despite herself, watery and genuine, and then she was kissing him, sudden and fierce, and tasting like coffee and tears and the terrifying possibility that maybe they could be more than their carefully maintained defenses. When they broke apart, Harper rested her forehead against his and said, "This is going to be so complicated. Probably. Your father's going to make our lives hell. Definitely. And we might fail spectacularly and end up hating each other. It's possible." Evan pulled back to look at her, to memorize the exact green of her eyes and the way her lips curved into a reluctant smile. "But we might also succeed spectacularly and end up actually happy. Isn't that worth the risk?" "When did you become an optimist?" "When I crashed my car and got rescued by a cynic who taught me that running away can sometimes look like running toward." Harper kissed him again, softer this time, and Evan felt something unlock in his chest. The final piece of armor falling away, leaving him vulnerable and terrified and absolutely certain that this woman, this moment, this impossible gamble was the rightest thing he'd ever done. They were still standing there, foreheads together, when the shop's window exploded inward in a shower of glass, a brick landing at their feet with a note attached. "Go home, gold digger." Harper stared at the destruction. Her shop violated, her safety threatened, the violence of Evan's world crashing literally through her windows, and something shifted in her expression. Not fear, but fury, cold and bright. "Call your lawyer," she said, voice steady as steel. "If your father wants a war, let's give him one he'll never forget." Evan had never loved her more than in that moment, standing in broken glass, choosing to fight instead of flee. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and pulled out his phone to mobilize every weapon in his considerable arsenal. The real battle was just beginning. Richard Cross arrived in Crescent Bay 3 days later with the full weight of his empire behind him. Lawyers, investigators, a PR team, and enough money to buy the entire town, if necessary. Evan watched his father's convoy pull up from the flower shop's window, felt Harper's hand slip into his, and braced for the confrontation he'd been avoiding his entire life. "You don't have to do this alone," Harper said quietly. "I know." He squeezed her hand. "But he's my father. My mess to clean up." "Our mess now." She said it with such conviction that Evan felt his throat tighten. "That's what marriage means, right? Even fake ones." "Harper." "Go talk to your father. I'll be right here when you're done." Evan met Richard Cross on the beach, neutral territory where the roar of waves would prevent eavesdropping and the vast open space would make his father's usual intimidation tactics less effective. Richard looked older than Evan remembered, grayer, thinner, the skin around his eyes creased with what might have been exhaustion or rage or both. He stood at the water's edge in a suit that cost more than most cars, completely out of place in this small coastal town. "Evan, His father's voice was controlled, but Evan heard the fury underneath. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The Ashford deal is dead. Victoria's family is threatening legal action. Our stock price has dropped 4% because investors think I can't even control my own son. Good. Good. Richard's calm cracked slightly. You've undermined years of careful planning, embarrassed our family, and married some nobody from nowhere. And you think that's good? I think, Evan said, keeping his voice level despite the adrenaline flooding his system, that I finally made a choice that was mine instead of yours. And yes, that's good. That's the best thing I've done in my entire life. You're throwing away your inheritance, your position, your future. For what? A woman you've known 3 weeks? A flower shop that barely breaks even? For freedom. Evan moved closer, and something about the movement made his father step back, made Richard realize that his son was no longer the compliant heir he'd shaped. I've spent 32 years being the cross-industries prince, the carefully maintained investment you'd someday cash in. And I'm done, Dad. I'm done performing, done sacrificing myself for your vision of empire, done pretending I want any of this. You think you can survive without me? Richard's laugh was bitter. You think that pathetic town and your little wife can protect you from the consequences of defying me? I think, Evans said quietly, that I'd rather struggle honestly than succeed on your terms. Richard stared at him for a long moment, and Evans saw something he'd never expected in his father's eyes. Genuine confusion, the incomprehension of a man who'd built his entire identity on power and control encountering something he couldn't understand or manipulate. I could destroy her, Richard said finally. Harper Hayes, her shop, her reputation, her entire life, one phone call and she loses everything. You could try. Evan's voice went cold. But I've spent 3 weeks working with her, learning from her, and she's tougher than you give her credit for. She survived New York, survived losing her mother, survived rebuilding a business from grief. You think your lawyers and money scare someone who's already lost everything that mattered. Everyone has a breaking point. Find hers, and I'll make it my life's mission to dismantle everything you've built. Evans said it calmly, with absolute conviction. I have $4 billion, Dad. Offshore accounts you don't control. I can hire the best lawyers in the country. I can fund investigations into every shady deal, every ethical compromise, every corner you've cut building your empire. And I will do it happily if you threaten Harper again. You'd burn your own legacy? It was never my legacy. It was yours. Evan took a breath, felt the weight of 32 years finally lifting. I'm building something different now, something real, and you can either accept that or spend the rest of your life raging against a son who refuses to be the heir you wanted. Your choice. Richard's face cycled through emotions, rage, disbelief, something that might have been grief at the loss of the future he'd planned so carefully. When he spoke again, his voice was raw, almost human. I gave you everything, every opportunity, every advantage. How can you throw it away like it means nothing? Because it does mean nothing, Evan said, gently, and he was surprised to find he felt something like pity for this man who'd confused control with love. You gave me wealth and power and position. You never gave me a choice. You never asked what I wanted, what I dreamed about, who I might have been if you'd let me figure it out myself. He paused. I don't hate you, Dad, but I can't be you, and I'm finally okay with disappointing you if it means not disappointing myself. Richard turned away. stared out at the ocean like it held answers he'd lost long ago. The wind tangled silver in his hair, and for the first time, Evan saw not a titan of industry, but a man grown old in pursuit of something that could never love him back. Silence stretched, broken only by the sigh of waves until Richard's shoulders finally dropped, resignation threading through. "You make your choice, Evan." His voice was an admission and a warning, but so will I. He marched up the sand toward his waiting entourage, and Evan watched his father's figure, the one that had blotted out the sun so much of his life, grow smaller in the dawn. The old man was diminished, but not defeated. War might be over for him, but the world his father had shaped would echo here for a long time. Back at the shop, Harper was sitting at her workbench, hands buried in a jumble of fresh-cut peonies and wild ferns, the mess chaotic and alive. She looked up as Evan entered, gaze searching for the verdict in every line of his face. "Did you win?" she asked. "No one wins with him," Evan answered honestly, pushing hair from his brow. "But maybe we survived," she nodded, biting her lower lip. "People have already started boycotting the shop. Got some emails, couple of nasty voicemails. Your father's reach is long." He slipped into the chair beside her. "He'll make noise, rattle cages for a while. He might succeed temporarily, but his power ends in Crescent Bay. Out here, people care about character, not headline scandal. Let me weather the worst of it. This place, it's worth fighting for." A knock rattled the door and the bell jingled sharply. It was Mrs. Chen, followed by Mayor Torres, then Barry the dentist, and soon after, a string of regulars, arms filled with mismatched vases, ordering bouquets, making small talk. They'd heard the rumors, they'd seen the articles, but here they were with cash and kind smiles and a clear message. Crescent Bay looked after its own. In the coming days, it wasn't just support. People brought Harper flowers grown in backyard plots, donated by church ladies and children with sticky fingers. Locals repaired her broken windows for free, painted the walls, tuned the chimes. When the new bank tried to foreclose, the community lawyer fought it pro bono, with media attention that shamed the suits into quietly withdrawing. Evan worked alongside Harper, arranging deliveries, staying up late on the books, teaching her how to build sturdy shelves for the front window. He was seen, truly seen, for the first time in his life, and it changed him. Harper, for her part, struggled. She had never belonged so fiercely in her own life, and now she found herself afraid, terrified even, of loving Evan the way she realized she did. Because loving him meant risking hurt all over again. The collapse of her business, the meddling of his family, the small betrayal of letting herself want and hope. One night, during a rare lull, Evan found her alone in the shop, staring at a half-finished arrangement. Petals littered the counter like confetti after a parade, bright and bruised. "This shop, us, it's not safe," she murmured. "What if it all falls apart anyway?" Evan leaned against the counter, his gaze steady. "It will. Someday. Everything ends. Eventually. But—" He picked up a daisy, twirled it between his fingers. "Building something you choose. Loving someone by accident on purpose. Maybe that's the point. Not safety, but the chance to make meaning out of chaos." Harper swallowed. The admission caught in her throat, but she didn't run. She let herself trust just a little, leaning into the possibility that love wasn't another trap, but a door. The morning of their one-year marriage anniversary, a letter arrived. Official, gold-embossed, legalese spelling final settlement from Cross Industries. It wasn't everything, but it was enough: a transfer of ownership for the shop, full control of Evan's long frozen accounts, and a quiet agreement to never contact them again. Richard Cross, for all his war-making, chose peace in the end, smart enough to see surrender when the terms were livable. Evan and Harper celebrated with midnight pizza on the beach, a kind of triumph that tasted like salt and laughter, and the realization that, after all the bargains and pretenses and lines drawn in sand, the fairy tale was only just beginning. Wedding day, again, but this time real. The flower shop overflowed with blooms and human warmth. Crescent Bay turned out in force. Mrs. Chen wept happy tears. Mayor Torres read terrible poetry. Even Barry the dentist, suit pressed in honor of the occasion, distributed homemade fudge at the reception. Harper walked down the makeshift aisle, bouquet a riot of wildflowers, heart thunderous. Gone was the girl afraid of mistakes. She'd become a woman willing to risk her heart twice to the same runaway billionaire. Evan met her at the altar, nervous, unruly hair, hands shaking just a bit. He looked nothing like the man who'd crashed into Crescent Bay. No armor, no careful mask, just Evan, finally and wonderfully himself. Their vows, spoken into the hush, honest, imperfect, with laughter threaded through tears. "Of all the things I've run from, I've never wanted to run from you," Evan said, voice low and sure. Harper's answer: "You gave me more than a place to belong. You reminded me who I was before I got scared. I promise to keep building with you, even on the days we don't have blueprints." They married. Again, this time under sun and town and gentle approval. In the weeks and years to come, their life wasn't always easy. Evan's name still drew questions, sometimes suspicion. Harper's anxiety returned in waves. There were months when money was tight, when storms battered the shop or family ghosts shook the windows at night. But there was laughter, always, and forgiveness for mistakes. Evan found his worth not in numbers, but in things he made with his hands: chairs, shelves, a crib for the baby who arrived 2 years later. Harper painted again, not for approval, but for herself, walls bright with wild color. Every anniversary, they took a walk down the coast to the first spot where Evan had stood bleeding, lost, and found by the woman who would become his life's anchor. "Do you regret it?" Harper would ask, the old fear softened now to habit. "Not for a second," Evan would answer, even on the days when it felt like drowning, because love, they discovered, isn't safety. It's the decision to make a harbor together, to build something beautiful, fragile, and fiercely true in the face of every storm. And for them, that was the only happy ending worth running toward.